Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how I set up my plane from with the TX. I'm using a Graupner MZ24. A lot of different transmitters out there. You can use any single one of the leading transmitters, as long as you have the ability to control everything you need to control and to mix everything you want to mix. Flight modes is very important. One of the things that I do, and I will show this in a later film as well. I have 5 flight modes. I have my launch preset, have my launch, and when I move this switch to that direction, I have here the speed, cruise, thermal. So I have 3 flight modes for gliding, and I have 2 modes for launching, which is the launch mode and the launch preset. Launch preset causes the nose of the plane to come up really fast and puts the wing in a position where it creates enough lift to bring the nose up fast. Launch is a minimum drag of the plane. The plane is already pointed straight up, so it's going up, and we want to minimize the drag. And when I put this switch in the third position, you see this is spring, and this position and this position are discrete. Okay, the last position is spring switch. So I release this, I'm in launch mode. Now when I flip this, I'm in one of these, either one of them. You can see here on this is when I flip the switch. Okay, I'm in the launch preset mode, launch mode. Now I'm in, this is cruise, thermal, and all the way up is speed. The logic that I'm using is that camber down is switch down, camber up is switch up. So speed, camber is up, we're in reflex, cruise in the middle, and when I bring the switch down, I'm in thermal. That's just the way I like to do things. I have only 3 things. You know, there are a lot of switches. I'm using only 3. Okay, one of them isn't exactly a switch. I'm using this switch, I'm using this switch like I just showed you, and I'm using this slider. None of the other switches do anything. This one calls out the timer. I have a timer running here on the bottom, and this one just calls out the time, but it's not used for flight. None of the other switches are used for flight. The reason is simplicity. I just want 2 switches that I can operate with one hand, the hand that I'm not throwing with. So this hand works a lot on the sticks and then grabs the plane and throws the plane. So I'm doing most of the stuff I'm doing on you know, the discrete stuff I'm using with this hand. Okay, this slider, when I'm in thermal mode, it can add more camber. So this is like, if you want to call it thermal 1, thermal 2, this is my thermal 1, and my thermal 2, I can set whatever I want. When setting up the plane, one thing, there are a couple of things that are really important about setting a plane. When you're setting a plane, one thing is no double centering. That means that when you move the aileron, it always comes back exactly to the position that it started out from. You don't want anything more than 0.2 millimeters is way too much. You're not going to have a plane that you can fly, because it's gonna, for example, if it's in the ailerons, it's gonna roll to the left, roll to the right. It's never gonna fly straight. The same thing with the elevator. If the elevator is double centering, you're never going to be able to trim the plane to fly slow. Every time you touch the controls, you'll have something else, and there's just no way you can trim a plane to fly well, especially in light conditions, if you have double centering. So you need to check that. You need to verify that you don't have any problems with servos. Sometimes cheap servos or servos that have some sort of friction will give you a double centering. Another thing that can cause double centering is stretchy lines. You know, if you have some sort of friction in where it connects, even the strings for the tails can have friction at the position where the strings touch the horns. So you need to check everything, and if you do have problems, you need to solve them. You need to use some sort of spray lubricant. You need to make sure that you don't have anything binding. You need to check that there are no push rods touching something that they shouldn't be touching, and if you need to, use some lubricant. You know, there are silicone sprays, there are WD-40, something like that, to remove the friction. Maybe the hole on the head of the servo arm is too small, and maybe you need to clean up the push rods because there's some piece of metal that's scraping on something. Clean it. Make sure that everything goes back to center. Now, when a plane is brand new, everything is tight, and usually it doesn't go to the center as well as sometimes it does after a few hours of flying it, which also means that sometimes when you set up your system, and it's bringing me to the second point, everything needs to be symmetrical. So everything needs to move. Left side of the plane and right side of the plane, and I'm talking about the ailerons, need to move the same amount to the direction when you ask for it. You know, it needs to be symmetrical. But if you have a little bit of friction, a little bit of loads when the plane is new, after about 2, 3, 4 months of flying the plane, if you will check again, you will see that one aileron is moving more than the other, and suddenly it explains why the plane is turning better to one direction than the other. So every few months, I take after a few months of flying a brand new airplane, I take it and I recheck that everything is moving symmetrically, and if I need to, I'll adjust the program once again. In order to set up the plane the best that I can, I'm using gauges. These are gauges from Great Plains. I bought one a long time ago, and a friend gave me another, and I'm using two. It saves a lot of time. I'm looking at one aileron, I'm looking from the other side at the other one, and I'm saving a lot of time. There are some gauges that were posted on RC groups a while back that you can print out, put on a piece of cardboard, and use. Just stick them on your ailerons. They're pretty good. Done right, they're pretty good, and it's very, very important. Having the ailerons move like you want them, symmetrically, each one moves the same, is very important. Otherwise you will always hunt around for the correct trim. So I check that everything is moving, even in the flaps. I usually set up a mix. I set up both flaps to move, then I make sure that one flap is moves perfectly. I see that they're both reaching the same position, fully deployed, and then I use a mix and I mix between one flap and the other one in order to correct the misalignments. You know, sometimes it's just geometry, sometimes it's friction, sometimes it's, I don't know what, maybe servos, but you get the halfway, you get the flap, one flap goes 60 millimeters and the other one just 15. So I would put it at and I'm using one of the multi-point curves. I'll see if I can show you this. I'm using a multi-point curve in order to, where did I put it? Here. This is my in this mode. You can see that every single, 4% just to fix it, and one of the flaps at this point. Here I have 2%, here I have 1%, and that just makes the movement symmetrical. So I put the flaps at one position and I correct the other one, then I put it in another position and I mix in a little bit movement to the other one just to get the same amount of movement. So I get both flaps. It takes a little bit of time, but I get both flaps to move exactly the same all through the movement, so I don't get any unexpected rolling when I land the plane. Each mode, you can see this is speed. This is, I don't know if you saw that, but there's a small difference in the movement of the ailerons, and this is a thermal. It's not just the center that's moving, it's not just, you know, the camber, it's also the amount of movement. It's there's a big difference. You see, thermal mode has less movement and also a different differential than cruise or speed. You're flying at a different speed. The air from the wing is affecting the tail, affecting the tail differently. So you need different compensations for you know, in your mixes because of the speed and the airflow on the rest of the plane. So you have different differential. You have a different dual rate, because when I'm flying in cruise mode, I want to have an agile plane to get the plane to turn and get to where I want it to go, especially if I'm flying in turbulence. Once I enter good air, I'm in thermal mode and I have my rates turned down because I don't want to over control the plane. If I put too much aileron to one direction, then a little bit to the other direction, and then back and forth, I'm moving the wing way too much and creating way too much drag. So I want to minimize that as much as possible. And in order to minimize that as much as possible, I want to have just the right amount of movement. I set up my elevator and aileron so I have a reasonable maneuverability. I usually don't ask the plane to fly tighter than 60 degrees bank angle. That's quite a lot. So I set up my max elevator to be consistent with a 60-degree bank, which is quite a bit, and I don't ask it for any more. In speed mode, I have enough elevator in order to do a little bit of aerobatics, because it's fun sometimes. Do the victory roll and do a victory loop after you get your time done. So I also have elevator to camber mixed in. The reason to have elevator to camber mixed in is because when you are pulling on the elevator, you are changing the pitching the airplane. You're basically changing the angle of attack. So now you're flying at a higher angle of attack, and higher angle of attack means more lift from the wing. If you want to have a lot of lift with low drag, you want to camber the airfoil. So if you're already asking the plane to give you high CL, you want it to give the that CL, that lift coefficient, with as little drag as possible. So you want to camber the airfoil at that point. That's why you want to have a plane that when you're pulling on the elevator, and I realize you're not seeing that the elevator is moving, you're only seeing that the servo of the elevator is moving, the trailing edge drops a little bit. Now I have this, I have very little in thermal mode. I have much more in cruise, and much more than that in speed mode. Also when pushing down, when I'm pushing down the elevator, the ailerons come up, okay, because I'm asking for negative lift. If I'm asking the plane for negative lift, I want the wing to produce negative lift with minimum amount of drag, so I'm giving it some reflex. Same, okay, this is now in cruise. It basically reaches the same position. I'm actually cycling between the positions now, and you can see that the trailing edge stays the same with minimum down. Okay, if this is thermal, I give it full down, I get quite a bit of reflex, and it's the same in all modes. There's a little trick that I do when I deploy the flaps and I move the aileron. Now I have a lot of aileron going up, and the aileron that's supposed to go down is actually going a little bit up as well. This unloads the flaps. It's similar to doing this, okay? But it's just mixed in. You need also to mix in some up elevator when doing this, because you're actually taking away some of the flaps. And I know this mix is a little bit complicated, and if anyone wants some information about that, then I will post separately on RC groups. But what this does, and I also have 100%, you can see on the servo here, I have a lot of aileron to rudder mix when my flap is fully deployed. Okay, when I bring it up, suddenly it's very little aileron to flap mix. Okay, so when I drop it, you can see I'm taking down the stick, and suddenly the mix kicks in. And what this does, it gives me a lot of maneuverability coming in. So when I'm coming into landing and I'm moving the sticks, the plane rolls, the plane brings up the camber a little bit. It's a difficult mix to make, but if you have some time, you should try it. It's nice. So I will post my settings, and what I do is all of my settings are relative to the flap being in line with the center tab. So basically, I watch from here, I set this up, I move it, the gauge, so that when I look from the side, it's on 0, and then I have my differential, how much the aileron goes down, how much the aileron goes up. Okay, in each mode there's the setting. The wing is molded in speed. Please remember that it's molded in speed, so it's flush in speed. Then it's a little bit cambered down, about 2 millimeters in the trailing edge for cruise. Thermal, it's a 3.5 to 4 millimeters, and I can add up to 6 with the slider. I found that more than 6 is not really beneficial. Maybe if you're flying in very flat air, no turbulence, maybe then, but I don't have that type of weather too much here, so I don't have that set up on my system. I have no need for it. Elevator to camber is how much when you are in the mode. Let's say this is cruise, I do maximum of up elevator, and I'm about 4 to 5 millimeters. It's hard to see from the distance I'm at, and you can see that also on my settings page. One last thing is expo. A lot of people, I use quite a bit of expo. Lately I've been trying to teach myself to use less and less expo. The reason I like expo is when I'm in thermal, I can move a lot of stick and get very little movement. Okay, get very little movement versus you know, having a lot of much more movement in other modes, again in the elevator. But I found that sometimes too much expo is not good, because the movements just jump up on you. Okay, you're adding a little bit of movement and suddenly you have too much. So I have been trying to get rid of my expos and reduce them. It's a matter of personal preferences. My suggestion to you is don't use too much. Use a little bit, don't use too much. Let's see. CG, what I do is I take something sharp. I have the CG marked here on the wing, and what I do is I will basically balance the plane. I will balance the plane like so, and I can't do it right now because the canopy isn't on, but I will balance the plane. I will just put it here, and I will balance it till it's flat. Okay, it's a piece of masking tape that's here on the wing and marks the position of CG that I want to use. After I'm done with it, I can always peel it off. Usually I leave it on my planes, and it's a little bit off center because this is the wing with the peg, and I can play with CG and I can measure it afterwards after I play with it. A few other things that may interest you is that I have my switch here. I have the 4 servos and the place for the ballast. I have my receiver underneath. I have my battery in line with this. On this plane I managed to get I think a 900 milliamp battery in, and on another plane that was a little bit too heavy, so I put in 650 milliamp. It depends on the servos and the servos position and everything else. If I take off the switch, I can put probably 900 milliamps in the other one as well, and maybe 1200 milliamps in here, but I like switches. I think that's about it. If you have any more questions about build or setup, ask away, and if I see that people want something, you know, a lot of questions are repeating, then I will make another vid for it. I will make a couple more of in the field clips, and that will be the end of the building instructions for this plane. Thank you very much.